Welcome to Swallow the Gap, the podcast that delves into the critical world of dysphagia practice and education. I'm your host, Dr. Tim Stockdale, and I'm thrilled that you have come to join us for conversations aiming to bridge the gap in understanding, knowledge, and implementation surrounding dysphagia intervention. If you're a healthcare professional, a student, or anyone passionate about enhancing the lives of individuals with dysphagia, then you're in the right place. Swallow the Gap podcast is a production of Gap Education, and we are predicated on an unrelenting mission to improve dysphagia care and education. Nothing we say is legal advice. Nothing should be taken without scrutiny. We strive for accuracy, but we do not imply perfection. We value diversity in backgrounds and opinions. Therefore, our guests will not always reflect what we believe. In fact, we may change our minds on topics as we learn more, because this is how progress is made. Through discussion, critical thinking, and open minds, we serve as catalysts for advancement in medically focused speech-language pathology. Welcome, everybody. Today I have with me Mr. Ed Bice, who is a clinical consultant for IOPI Medical. He is an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland, and he works clinically at a nonprofit speech clinic. What I like about my conversations with Ed over the past years is I feel that you are really able to speak to many of the issues that we're seeing from a clinician side, but also rubbing shoulders and more than that within the academic side of things. I'm going to be very straightforward and say, for good reasons or not, this is one of the most intimidating podcasts to me that I've done, because I wish they could hear you laughing. They could see you laughing on here, but it really is, because from what I see on social media, you are so steeped in the literature, but you really take it and apply it to a clinical side that it's intimidating. I know there's a lot that I need to know. And you said you've been doing this for 40 years. I've been doing this for between 9 and 10. So I'm like, so be gentle, but no, really, I appreciate you taking the time to come on. Other than what I mentioned when I introduced you, what would you like for people to know about you?
So first, I want to say thanks for having me on. I always, I never take for granted the opportunity to have this kind of conversation. So I think that one of the interesting things that people who don't know me, who have just see my presence on social media or hear me speak at a convention or read an article that I've written, they don't know my work in the trenches. I spent about 15 years working in nursing homes. I lived through the transition from lesser cluster charges to the RUGs group when almost every major nursing home company in the country went bankrupt. And I was part of a company that went bankrupt, and how productivity impacts us and how financial decisions at that level impact us. I've lived through all of that. And I don't think that people really understand that. I've worked in acute care. And I've worked as both a clinician and as a manager. So I've managed acute care budgets. I've worked with acute care patients from ICU all the way through, worked in a subacute ventilator unit. So I have that kind of background. And I even managed respiratory therapists at that point in time. And so I've kind of touched all the different settings, so to speak. In 40 years, you can kind of get around. But I think that people don't know that about me. I think that they just think that, I became this product consultant or whatever, and that I've always had this kind of life. And that's certainly, yeah, that's right. That's certainly not the case.
Yeah.
That's certainly not the case.
Yeah, I appreciate you throwing that out there. We get a broad array of listeners. Some of them are in graduate school and may not have heard of you. Some of them may be professionals and not have heard of you. And some of them may have heard of you and have the perception that is not there about, that you're just part of the Ivory Challenger space station. Is the Ivory Tower in outer space now? The Ivory... Yeah, right. But the Ivory Tower, and, not relatable. But I from what I've seen, and it's been limited, I have a different perspective. I have a perspective of you as a clinician, one who's engaged in conversation about relevant issues, and one who has a very good perspective on many of these things that we go through. And so your article that you wrote about how it works in the real world, something that I appreciate that is also as someone with a background clinically. I mean, I've worked all but 1 year. I've worked a job outside of my, let's see. So I started in acute care. And then when I moved to Utah to work as clinical faculty here, there was like a year maybe where I wasn't also working in acute care. During that time, I was still seeing outpatients, but like almost my entire career, in fact, I would say my entire career, I've been seeing patients. It's never been just teaching or anything like that. And so I appreciate the perspective that you put out in this article, that it's not just the practical, let's see, or the disconnect. So we've got on one side, we've got the ivory tower. We've got people in academia who say, oh, it should be this way. It should be this way, without the perspective of the clinician. But on the other side, it's easy for, I think, clinicians to be dismissive of best practice, just saying that that's not practical. So I really like how you bridge that together within this. If there were a few major take-home points, or if you just wanted to talk about the gist of this within a few minutes, how would you summarize what you were hoping would come out of this article?
So I think that, again, you touched on it, both sides. I think that academics need to understand how clinicians actually operate and the problems and issues that they actually face. Being an adjunct professor myself, it's very easy to pontificate about this is the way that it should be done. Mm-hmm. And particularly, it's very easy if you haven't ever done it yourself. I think it was Socrates who said, nothing is impossible for the man who doesn't have to do it themselves. So I appreciate that. And I understand what that means, because I've been on the other side and I still treat patients. But at the same time, so there are kind of three players: the academic player, the student themselves, and their responsibility to bridge that gap between what they learned and what they're being asked to do or observing in their clinical placement. And then the third one is the supervisor in the clinical placement's responsibility to be sure that they're guiding the student in the best possible way without clouding them with all the burdens that come along with being a clinician in a place that is more concerned about making money than about taking care of people.
Yeah. In my mind, one thing that I like to do when I appear there to be an agonist-antagonist relationship, or this, one person versus the other, one school of thought versus the other, I like to look at the exaggerated perception on both sides. So let's pretend that really there are all these people in academia, and there may be some who are just like totally head in the clouds, unrealistic, never have seen a patient, and are just like, oh yeah, ideally this is what should be done. And if you don't do it, then shame on you, that sort of thing. And then on the other side, the clinicians who are like, we don't care, that's not practical, whatever. Just like this exaggerated perspective, because I think things are typically not like that, even though one side may sometimes like paint it that way. But I see all these reasonable people in the middle who are dealing with their own challenges and their own struggles and are trying to make sense of what they see. And the student just seems to be in a very challenging perspective if they're hearing something that's more idealistic in one place, but they are getting out and hearing supervisors sometimes say that that's not practical. I really do think that there are a lot of reasonable people in between there. How do we go about this? How do we help to make it not such a agonist-antagonist relationship?
So I think that the key person in the situation is the student. The student has the opportunity to go back to the school and talk about what they're seeing in their clinical placement. Students are paying a lot of money for education. And so I don't know why they feel intimidated, or if they even feel intimidated. I know my own students, often I have to drag information out of them. Why they feel intimidated to just go back and say, hey, you told me X. Mm-hmm. This is what I'm seeing. Help me understand why this is occurring or what is happening here and how these two things are either congruent or oppositional.
Okay.
And give me some support to try to navigate this situation. Students are young, and there, as I mentioned earlier when we were just chatting, there's a huge power differential.
Yeah.
Me as the professor, I'm giving you a grade. And so you're at my mercy, so to speak, giving me a grade. But what I say to my students is don't wait until you get my course evaluations at the end to hold me accountable.
Yeah.
Do it every class period. If I'm not helping you in a way that is facilitating your learning, then I'm not doing my job. Hold me accountable now. And then again, use me as a resource when you're outside of this class. And I'm going to tell something really funny, and I'm not going to use any names or anything, but I was teaching adjunct at another university, and the students went to their voice class, and the voice teacher said, "Surely Mr. Bice has told you about X, Y, and Z in your dysphagia course." And they all said, "Yes, he has." And she said, "Well, what did he say about it?" She said, "They're just making it up. That's what he said that they're doing." And the voice teacher was so taken back that, she came to me, and we had a conversation because one of her friends had done research in the area that was of contention. And, and I said, until this is proven, why would we tell students this is a truth?
Yeah.
Because someone is interested in it. No, we're not going to do that. But I found it so funny that the students were just so willing to go to that voice teacher and say, "Mr. Bice said it's just made up, and we're not going to do that."
So do you feel like they were willing to say something difficult to the voice instructor, but not to you in the class?
No, well, this group, they did both ways. They cut both ways, which I love, right? I mean, that's what I want. Tell me, because I can't help you unless I know the whole story, right?
Yeah.
So I think that students can help bridge that gap. And then I think that academics can do more, because we can't change productivity standards in a nursing home. We can't change the pressures that those clinicians are experiencing in a nursing home. We can't. I mean, but what we can offer is, maybe sending the student, say, "Hey, I chatted with my professor about this, and here's some information that might be helpful in this situation." But the other thing, and this is tough, just like it's tough for students to find jobs and for clinicians to find jobs, it's tough for universities to place students in clinical placements. It's tough. But you know what? If you really want to help the students, then when you find a student who is in a clinical placement with a supervisor that is misguiding them and providing them with misinformation, stop using that placement. You put in the hard work and find another place where you can place students and not put students in this situation anymore. I get it, because I have friends who have that job, and I think you had that job where you had to find clinical placements for students. It's not.
Fortunately not, because that's a job.
But at the same time, if you're, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
If you're going to take that job, do it right. You're getting paid money. The students are paying a lot of tuition. Don't put them in situations that are going to compromise them. And it's that simple. I'm not that simple, but it's that simple to say, no, we're not going to place someone there again. We're going to find another place to put our students.
Yeah.
So, because I think it's our job when students are with us, almost to put a hedge around them, right? And protect them, to guide them into the profession with a knowledge base and with a level of integrity that we want to see go into our field. But we can't just have them in the classroom and lecture at them and throw a bunch of facts at them and grade their tests and send them out and feel no responsibility for them. I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah. No, I know that you have mentioned mentorship as being something incredibly important to you. And to me, I'll throw it back to you. And I want to ask you how you would define a mentor and its relevance to our field. But really quickly, to me, like, I see it beyond just imparting information, imparting facts, and even testing on the information. But a mentor is much more personal to me. You're invested in an individual and their success on a personal level. How would
Right.
you set that apart?
Yeah, so interesting. And I talk about this in the beginning of that article that you've referenced, that the word mentor comes from the individual who took care of Hercules' son while he was on his great quest. And that was, he took care of him in every aspect.
Yeah.
Emotionally, physically, financially, educationally. Now, I'm not going to pay my students tuition. I can't go that far. But to realize that you have more than responsibility than just imparting facts, that's about learning, not about pontificating. People call me a professor. I like to think I'm a teacher. I'm not just professing facts. I'm trying to help people learn information that they can integrate into assessing and treating patients.
There is a theme that I see growing in many areas throughout the years. It's within teaching methods. It has been this idea of what you say, the professor, the sage on the stage who knows everything. And you as a student, you better absorb everything that the sage says so you can go and one day be as great as they are, like that sort of thing, versus a partnership that the instructor is responsible not only for the content, but for communicating it in a way that is congruent with best methods for teaching. And communicating with the students, getting their feedback, seeking their feedback as a mentor to them. And the students are not just trying to remember things, but they're trying to make sense of things and construct this new material based upon what they've already learned, to build upon things that they've learned in the past. But also, if something doesn't sit right and they're in a moment of cognitive dissonance where they have these two competing ideas that are not reconcilable, to be willing to be brave and reach out to the instructor and hold these conversations. And so I see it that there is a responsibility to be brave and take advantage of the resources, but also among instructors, there is a need for us to make ourselves, there is a need for instructors to make themselves approachable.
And available, right. That students feel like this is someone I can trust. I will tell you on my course evaluations, there are two questions that mean a ton to me, because sometimes you get lots of feedback that hurts your feelings.
Yeah.
But two questions. This professor cared, or I believe that this professor cared about my learning. And the other one is, I would recommend this professor to others.
Mm-hmm.
Those two questions are the first two questions I go to when I get my course reviews back.
There you go.
Because it's like, did these students feel like I cared about their learning? That's the most important thing to me. Not, did I meet all their objectives or whatever, but did I care?
Yeah. I mean, that sets the stage for everything, those two questions, I think.
So yeah, that's really tough though, as a professor to get that kind of feedback. But we need to, instead of being angry about it, or because this is their real perception, right? When they answer those questions. And so instead of being angry that they answered the question that way, really reevaluate what you're doing. They're paying our salaries. They deserve the best. So, and if we give them our best, then we can help elevate our profession going forward. So that's how I feel about students and the gap between students and clinicians. I don't know what to do about clinicians in the field as far as alleviating their circumstances that would make them project a negative image of the profession onto students, or that would have them tell students to do things that maybe are not ethical or not best practice, so to speak, but lack of better terminology. And as a professor, I can't fix that.
Sure.
But I can fix the things that I'm doing, and I can get the students to recognize what they're experiencing.
There's a lot to that. And I figure within every one of these episodes, there are 10 different paths that we could go down. And so, kind of staying true to some of the original conversation, I want to throw this out there, that I think there is a theme of something that doesn't necessarily have to be there in every situation, but it's a perception that's there, whether or not you're looking at the student to professor relationship, whether or not you're looking at the clinician to academic perspective, or the student to any of those, the student to the academic or the student to the SLP in the community, there is often a perception of power distance and that the other doesn't understand me. And so I see that as an instructor, as an SLP, that it is so essential to model vulnerability within what we do, not just to communicate, but not to be pretentious. I don't know everything. There's so much that I don't know. And one of these questions that you ask me, going to help me to learn that, going to help me to learn something I don't know, or there's going to be something that I missed. And when you bring this up, please don't be afraid. You'll be doing me a favor. If I miss something and you bring a different perspective that is going to correct it, please let me know. And that type of a change in a mindset between everybody, I think does so much for communication, because then people are willing rather than being afraid to talk.
So it's interesting that you say that, because I worked as a consultant for 6 years. I mean, I've worked as a consultant more than 6 years, but in this particular consultant role, I visited clinicians in their facilities while they were treating patients. And so I sat with them, which, is a very vulnerable place to be for the clinician, to have this person who's, supposedly somebody coming in and sitting with you while you treat your patient. So, you're already on the defensive, right? And me, when it comes to other adults, now I will coddle students quite a bit, but when it comes to other clinicians and people who are my peers, I'm not quite as forgiving, or I'm not as pragmatic. I guess that's the best thing to say. That I'm more I just say what I'm thinking, or say what I'm seeing. And I tried in those 6 years to figure out why clinicians were so resistant to learning something new. Not everyone, but why those clinicians who were so resistant to learning something new, why were they that way? And one of the conclusions that I drew during that time was a lot of these people are just in survival mode.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I come in and you give me a caseload that I know that I can't manage. You want me to see 23 people for 15 minutes apiece. Mm-hmm. And so I already know I'm defeated before I walk in the door. Yeah. And then I have to be 90% productive. And so I know that if somebody stops me in the hall to ask me a question, that I can't do that. And they have so many burdens and so much going on in their head that the patients kind of fall somewhere way down the list. And it's not that no one goes into this profession intending to be that way. But you have to make a paycheck. You have to feed your kids. You have to pay your mortgage. You have to pay your electricity bill. And so all the time in 40 years, my career is in constant motion. I know that I'm moving in one direction or the other. I'm either getting farther away from my goal, mm-hmm. or I'm getting closer to my goal. And at some point, when you get so beaten down, you don't have a goal anymore.
Your goal is to survive, like you said.
That's right. And when then somebody like me walks in and starts telling you, you need to do this, and it would be better if you did this. And it's like, you already feel bad because you're not doing what you're supposed to do.
Sure.
And then someone comes in and points it out to you. And that's a really hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
And so, I never figured out what to do about that during that whole 6-year period while I was doing that. Mm-hmm. But I recognized it. And I think that there are some strategies that people who find themselves in that place can actually use. That, as I told you, when we were chatting before the podcast, if you look at my resume, I've had lots of jobs, because sometimes that you have to get to a place that says, this is killing me and I have to get out of here, or this is unethical and I'm not going to do this, or this is more, this is just not getting me closer to where I want to be.
I've heard clinicians mention something that I'm understanding in the same way. But I want to throw it out there and help direct me, maybe toward differences if there are any, or maybe it's the exact same thing, that we have to quit working in places that aren't valuing us, 2, are making us do things that are unethical. And I mean, overall with that, just not supporting the vision of what our field should be overall. Is that similar to what you're saying?
I'm saying that I think that that a lot of us find ourselves in that situation. I think that's more common than we want to admit. And so it's like, if I live in a small town and there's, 5 speech pathology jobs in this town, are all 5 of them described by what we just said, that, they're not going to support us, they don't care. And so what do I do now?
Yeah.
Right. It's so complicated. But I think that one of the skills that we need to develop as professionals, and I'm not sure where along the continuum this should develop, is advocacy. That we need to learn to advocate for 3 things: our patients, our profession, and ourselves. And because we don't come out of school with those skills, we come out of school, and we've said this a couple of times, with having lived in a situation where there was a tremendous power differential the whole time we were there, where we had to bow to the powers that be. We have to do what our instructors say to get the grades that we need so that we can get out of school. We have to do what our supervisor at our clinical placement says in order to get out of there, to get the grade so we can graduate. And so we have acquiesced to every person in our lives to get through.
I can think of a job where I've been explicitly told in different words slightly to keep my head down and my mouth closed. Basically, don't rock the boat. But
see, here's the thing. Of course, I'm a boat rocker. No. I mean, and that, if I find a weak spot, I'm going to pounce on it. But I don't think that's how we need to look at things. I don't think that the things that we're doing or asking is rocking the boat. I think that the way we need to shift the mindset and the way we need to shift the conversation when we find ourselves in these situations is not that we're pushing back, but that we're trying to elevate. And the difference would be, I'm not going to do that, to sitting down and saying, so if I do that, here are the possible consequences. And here is how it impacts us ethically. Here's how it impacts us legally. Here's how it's not benefiting our patients. Here's how it's not benefiting our department. Here's how it's not benefiting our facility.
Yeah.
The problem is we don't have the repertoire to be able to have those conversations. I wonder how many people know how their facility gets reimbursed, period. If you work in a hospital, do you understand how DRGs work? Do you understand how these decisions are being made based on DRGs? If you're in a nursing home, do you understand how PDPM works? Because if we're going to have these conversations with people who are in charge, that's what their life revolves around.
It gives you a lot of leverage within that. Do you care if I just mentioned something out there about my understanding of DRGs and something that I think that, boots to the ground that we could do that might make things better? And so it seems to me, from what I understand, that a lot of the reimbursement in acute care is modeled after a fee-for-service mindset. However, if you have, hypothetically, so if you get pneumonia and the hospital says, okay, in this area or the payer source in this area, it should cost X amount of dollars to do that, then you get, $30,000 or whatever it is. And so it kind of becomes fee for service because you're accounting as a speech pathologist for a piece of the pie. You're advocating that the rehab department should get reimbursed this much of the piece of the pie, which, okay, I get that. However, in so many of the things that are not billable and that we might not be considering is preventing nosocomial infections. So if someone's admitted with a stroke and the hospital gets $30,000, and by me not spending time doing something that's not billable, like beefing up my documentation or advocating for time to review the fluoro study so I can watch some things frame by frame, or providing, just so many things that aren't technically billable, but that in the long run, the hospital, if they get a nosocomial pneumonia, the hospital's going to be out so much money. Or if they get readmitted for a similar diagnosis, the hospital is going to be penalized. And so there are these indirect preventative costs that, if they were easily quantifiable, that I think we can leverage that as a clinician, like you're saying, understanding how they're paid, how they're penalized, that it doesn't just make sense to look at it, oh, you have this many billable units, that's great. But on a macro scale, like, I did this, and that is likely to prevent this person from staying another day or getting their care escalated so they're in the ICU or readmitted and you penalized, like that type of a thing.
Right. Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. I think that, another publication of mine is how SLPs interact with RDs, registered dietitians. And it's like, it's, hey, if I take this extra 5 minutes to talk to the dietitian about diets and about how we're going to proceed so that this patient doesn't become malnourished and dehydrated and prolong their hospital stay because I made this decision in a silo,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm helping to make the facility money. But see, if you don't know all of those things,
Mm-hmm.
if you're just bombing along,
Mm-hmm.
and I think this is a lot. It's a lot to know. It's a lot to learn.
Yeah.
But in the end, it makes your life easier because then you know how to approach these people because you know what mindset they're bringing to the table so that you can say the words that they want to hear and use the buzz terminology that may get you farther along than you are now.
Yeah. And you mentioned a lot about self-advocacy and how important that is to you. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about why you think that is, because I agree. If we know these things, then we can advocate for ourselves and ultimately make things better for our patients too. Do you think so that there's a lot of this that we can do on the level of ourselves, our own development and our own reflection and thinking strategically, but also, you think about our continuing education and our professional development, there's not enough necessarily on specifics of normal swallow physiology and all these other things. There needs to be more, but proportionally, there doesn't seem to be as much on advocacy for more like systemic things like this that we need to think laterally or think outside of the box to help make things better. So it does, a lot of responsibility falls back on the clinician. How do you think maybe as clinicians, as individuals, but also on a larger scale, how can we facilitate this knowledge being more common so that we can help to make our field better?
Wow.
That's a whopper.
I feel like Miss America being put on the spot. So first of all, the first step, I always think about a 12-step program. The first step is realizing that this is a problem that we need to solve, right? That we need to understand how to advocate for ourselves and that we didn't get that up to this point. Now we can spend our time pointing fingers and saying, they should have and he should have. And, let's don't waste our energy and time there. Let's talk about moving forward. I think, again, knowledge, it's always boils back down to what you know and how you articulate what you know. So I understand if we keep this patient an extra day in the hospital, that we're going to lose this much money.
A lot.
So then let's do this because it has the possibility of, or if you buy me this piece of equipment, we can learn this so much faster.
Yeah.
So that we can facilitate faster discharges so that so let's do a study and collect data for 3 months and figure out if this is a problem and if we can help it.
Yes. Ed, that is such a great train of thought. Let me just interject something right there, because I don't know if everyone realizes the magnitude of that extra day. So if you pretend it's a $20,000 payment to the hospital, you keep someone for 5 days, it's $4,000 a day. If you keep them for 4 days, it's $5,000 per day. So, on average, it works out to be thousands of extra dollars, which is so much more than our CPT code that we're billing for a swallow treatment or for whatever. And so just the magnitude of that impact is huge. So sorry, go ahead.
Right. No, and I think that every workplace, whether it be inpatient rehab, whether it be skilled nursing facility, whether it be hospital, has that kind of vulnerability that you can find to create leverage for yourself. So I need this piece of equipment because if we can get patients to be comfortable eating regular diets, because in my world, it's always the patient's decision, right? If we can get them to where they're comfortable doing that, we can discharge them to home or to an independent living and not to a skilled nursing facility and maximize our reimbursement. I'm talking from an inpatient rehab facility kind of perspective. If we can, then from a skilled nursing facility, if we can get imaging, then we know how to be more efficient with the time that we spend with these people. And they're probably going to not need to be here as long because under PDPM, reimbursement continues to diminish across time, not for speech, but for PT and OT, which seem to be the primary drivers anyway. But if we can facilitate that so that we can get higher levels of independence in shorter periods of time, those are the kinds of things that financial people want to hear. But if we walk up to them and just say, you know what, I need you to buy me an SEMG device, they're just going to say no. And then we can walk away and be angry.
I mean, it takes a long time, even with something that you can directly bill for, like transnasal endoscopy unit for billing fees. It takes a long time for $200 or $300 or however many hundreds of dollars that is to add up to a $30,000 unit. But if you tap into these other things, like we get to keep more of the money and this is why, then it just unlocks so much more potential.
Right. And I think that's why it's worth putting in the time, first of all, wherever you work, to learn how the money flows. So where does it come from? How is it generated? How is it saved? What are the things or the words that the person who makes the decision want to hear? And the other thing is that make a plan. Don't ever walk into a conversation or a situation where you don't have a plan. You know what you're talking about. You have goals for the conversation. Now, I'm not saying if someone stops you in the hallway that you're going to have to say, wait a minute, I have to go back to my office and make a plan. And
I'll get back to
you. But when you're getting ready to ask for something or to have a conversation about how work flows in your facility, that you have a plan and that you're ready to articulate it and that you have the information that you need to present your case and that you're not just going off the cuff. There's a great book called Crucial Confrontations.
Or Crucial Conversations?
Nope, this is same authors. They have done this book on confrontations, and it's about how to prepare for these situations where you are going to be confronted. And so you have a couple of choices, right? Our limbic system kicks in, and so we just
right away.
And nothing happens. And then we get on social media that night and say, my administrator did this, or my boss, did, and it's like, that didn't change anything. But if we can stick through the conversation and not get emotional and not run away and let them see that we're here and we know what we're talking about. We know what we're doing. I'll never forget a conversation I had when I was working a weekend rotation at the hospital, and I evaluated a patient. She had her 5th stroke. And the first thing I said to her was, you need to find a new hobby. And, anyway, I said, obviously I'm not the first speech pathologist you've met, right?
No,
I'm not. So tell me about your journey with speech pathology. I let her tell me, of course, she'd been to inpatient rehab where she got vital stim and she was discharged on thickened liquids, which she hadn't been using at home. Yeah. And she was almost afraid to tell me that, like I was going to get angry with her or something. But anyway.
You know what, though? I can just by you telling me the first thing that you said, you need to get a new hobby, you automatically showed her that you're a person. Like you opened up through humor, which is a phenomenal way to connect people and to show them that we're real. So anyway.
I always try. That's what I always try. And so in the end, I did my clinical evaluation. Nothing had probably changed since her last modified. She was, she failed the Yale. She was, she was aspirating. It was pretty clear. And I just said to her, so, probably this can't be comfortable, you coughing every time you take a drink. Mm-hmm. So what I suggest to you is that when you get discharged from here, to find some place where you can go for therapy to help you so that you will stop aspirating. I didn't use those words, but that was what I said. Yeah. And then her family, there was probably 8 family members in the room. They were like, that's all? I was like, well, clearly you've already told me you don't want thickened liquids. Mm-hmm. You've already told me that, that you're not interested in engaging right now in a treatment plan. So what else do I have to say? And I walked out of the room, wrote my eval, got ready to walk into the next room, and a doctor stopped me in the hallway and said, "Excuse me, can I talk to you about 33B?" And I was, "Sure, you can talk to me about 33B." She said, "Well, I read your report." And the first thing, I was kind of shocked that she'd actually read what I wrote. And I said, "Well, thank you very much." And she said, "You didn't recommend thickened liquids for her." And I said, "That's right. Well, we usually recommend thickened liquids for people like that." Now, I could have gotten angry with her. I could have said, "Okay, I'll go change it." Or I could have, walked away. But I said, "You're right. So let me explain to you why that we didn't go there." And I explained to her, the patient's wishes. I explained to her the background story. The lady had never had any chest infections. And she said, "Well, we usually put people like that on thickened liquids." And so I said, "The good news is you're the doctor and you can do whatever you want." And she said, "But we don't usually go against the speech pathologist recommendation." And I said, "Do you really want to know why why we're here?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Because aspiration doesn't cause aspiration pneumonia by itself." And she wrinkled her nose, which was the wrong thing to do. And so for the next 15 minutes, she got to hear me go through all the literature from Feinberg 1996, and this was a couple years ago, to Bach 2018, piece by piece by piece. And when I finished, I said, "So now do you understand why we to make those kinds of decisions?"
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall. So
and she said, "Thank you," and just walked away. She didn't, acquiesce to my way of thinking, but she was done with me. And the patient didn't get put on thickened liquids, right? So now, if I had not been prepared for that conversation by knowing all the literature and by being able to have that conversation and provide a rationale for why I did what I did, then the outcome would have been very different. And this is why I'm saying be prepared before you walk into a war. We wouldn't ever go to war with, our pockets empty. So why do we go into these situations without the information that we need to sway the discussion in our way? I'm not saying it's all going to go 100% our way, but to at least have a foothold and a rationale for why we're asking for what we're asking for, or why we did what we're doing, or why we're making the decisions that we're making. It is not unreasonable for people to ask that of us.
Yeah.
And I think that we feel above reproach, that we shouldn't be questioned that way, and we shouldn't be required to have those answers. And I disagree with that.
Because it can seem so overwhelming, learning everything that we need to know, what are some practical ways, making good use of our time to learn these things? I mean, there's some, we go out and read a textbook, there's that, but some people, and that's great.
Don't read textbooks, please.
Well, I just people might say that's not practical. So what are just some ways that we can?
Right. So I think that one way that so first of all, if you find yourself in a bad situation like that, you've got to form a posse. You've got to find people.
Join a gang.
That's right.
SLP gang.
We're gonna, the Jets. No, you've got to find a group of people who are intelligent, who aren't just going to get in the mud and wallow with you, but who are going to, to challenge you, but also help equip you. And I think it's better if you don't wait till you get to that point. Start a journal club. I know lots of local people. I'm speaking in 2 weeks at a group that is just a local group in a city of speech pathologists who realized that they had a need to have a support group and a learning group. And they have a meeting once a month, and they invite a speaker in to come, and talk about it. Or, my state organization, the Speech and Hearing Association of Virginia, I am the co-coordinator for the special for feeding and swallowing disorders. And we have like every other month, a journal club kind of meeting. Get your state organization to do that. Find people who are good at what they do and befriend them and create a group with them so that they can become a sounding board for you and a source of information. I have people that I do that with, and I have people who do that with me, and people who, and I, if you do that with me and you come to me and say, here's the situation, I'm not just going to say, well, that really sucks. No, I'm going to point you to literature, or I'm going to point you to laws, or I'm going to point you to ethics to help arm you and equip you to face these situations, and not just say, well, that really sucks, and move on. Form those kinds of relationships in your life.
You can anticipate, by doing that, you can anticipate the problems before it even happens to you. And you can equip yourself before it even happens to you, because you're talking to people from multiple generations, from a diverse background, that can say the things that they've gone through and really learn from one another. To me, there is an overwhelming amount of information out there to learn. So it behooves us to be strategic in our learning, to stand on the shoulders of those who've gone before us, not just to consume every word as gospel that they say, but you can learn a lot. You can learn so much from people who have different backgrounds than you.
And by getting together, if you work in a skilled nursing facility, you're most likely the only clinician there. And so, but if there's 10 skilled nursing facilities within 25 miles, the 10 of you could get together. And with Zoom, you don't even have to leave your own home to do it, right? You could just say, on Tuesday nights from 8 to 9, we're going to do this. Or if you have kids, get your kids to bed from 10 to 11, we're going to do this. And create a support group for yourself, because it's hard. Please don't ever hear me minimalize the problem that this is.
Yeah.
It is hard, and it's hard to be out there on your own, trying to facilitate good things happening for your patients. It's hard.
Yeah.
So make it easier for yourself by creating a support network.
Well, and you also, by you acknowledging how difficult it is, and by you talking about your different clinical settings and some of the things that you've gone through, you're putting yourself out there. And if you think of those who we trust the most and those who we tend to go to with our problems, they're people who we trust, who we believe in, and who we trust. One, they're not going to backstab us. Two, maybe they can relate to it and that they just have a good mind on this. And so I think these networks that bridge relationships and conversations of every sort are going to help us to get closer to people and feel more connected and more able to bring these things up. I think the worst thing that we can do is not communicate and not be willing to talk about things because we're afraid.
And isolate ourselves.
Yeah.
That's really tough. I will tell you, when the pandemic hit and we stopped being able to travel and see, our friends, and I every Tuesday evening, I had a group of people that were, that consisted of my peers and my mentors.
Mm-hmm.
And we met together every Tuesday evening, and we called it Wine and Wine. We brought our wine and we wined together.
Mm-hmm.
Because you need that. You need that support system to keep you motivated, and not just again, I've used that word a couple of times. I'm not going to use that word. And not just give in to the status quo, not just cave,
mm-hmm.
or maybe we call it burnout, not just allow yourself to be burned out.
Mm-hmm.
Because, if you spent all this money on being a speech pathologist, you're probably in this for the long haul.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be miserable every day. And when we are miserable, we're not providing the best care to the people who are depending upon us. And so taking care of yourself
mm-hmm.
is a priority, so you have something to give other people.
Yeah. And knowing the people who support you, just knowing that there are people who support you is going to be such an instrumental part of you feeling like you can get through things. To me, one of the most important things, I would say the top thing to me about any job is the people I work with. Are they supportive or are they catty? Are they going to gossip or are they going to be straight to me? That type of thing too. And I've been, really fortunate. Let me throw this out there. They just put a job posting. Rocky Mountain University of Health Professions is hiring someone with a PhD or an ED. That is a place like that to me. And I'm sorry, it's very personal too, but I also know they just posted this position and they're looking for somebody. So if anyone would be willing to move to Utah, consider applying for that job at rm.edu. So anyway.
No, that's okay. No, because when you find a good group of people, you want to stick with them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and that's not to say that surround yourself with people who always agree with you.
No.
Find people who are sharp, who will challenge you and who will make you better at what you do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Avoiding groupthink at the same time.
That's right. I love being the dumbest person in the room because that means I have the most to learn.
I have no choice, Ed. I am always the dumbest person in the room. That's how you're right. It's to my advantage.
But it's true. If you're the smartest person in the room, then you have nothing. There's nothing for you to learn. And there's no benefit in that. And the other thing that I will say, if we can change this mindset, because I'm type A, and when people challenge me and I believe me, and I have put people in my life specifically for that purpose to challenge me.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough sometimes, and again, the first thing you want to do is push back. But one of the things I've learned in 40 years is when people take the time to teach you or correct you, that's an investment that they're making in you. It's not that they're, not always, but for them, that there are people who will do it that way, that they consider it an investment. They're not doing it to bash you or make you feel bad about yourself. They're investing in you.
Yeah.
And I think that if we can understand that when people correct us, they're not always being malicious.
Yeah.
And evaluate it. Is this person here to try to help me be better? Or is this, and if that's the case, then maybe just let them do that and not get upset about it.
Yeah. It can be a difficult place to be in, depending on the tone and how things are typically. But even if somebody is correcting us from the perspective, about a bad perspective, like they are arrogant, that still doesn't mean we can't learn something from it. It doesn't mean they're right all the way, but we can still take that away and appreciate it regardless of the motive. And believe me, I have issues with that. It's not easy. I am not leading by example enough in that. So I don't want people to think I'm like talking down to them or anyone. I have probably the most to learn from this, but that's tremendous. I mean, take away what you can learn from every situation and every intention.
Absolutely. And I think that, as I was thinking about this podcast and this concept of the gap, and it was like, so we're not going to be talking about something academic, or we're not going to be talking about something that you need to know this, or that we're talking about more interpersonal skills and more personal skills about how we can fill in that gap of where we started and where we are and where we want to be. And I think it's so important for our own health and mental health to consider these concepts and to think about these things in light of all the other things you have to think about, making your productivity and keeping up with all the literature and it's just one more thing. Mm-hmm. But I think that if you can get this thing kind of in line, that the other things become easier.
Yeah. It does. And it's one of those things that you're kind of front loading your work. It may be harder to get it to adapt and to get into that mindset, or you have to put in more work up front, but ultimately it's going to make it better. I think on average, it's going to make it better and easier for you, better for our patients, and better for each other. But there could be some resistance up front, or it could be harder up front. But it's better than just floating along and complaining.
Yeah. Having a plan, so that you're not in the same place a year from now as you are today.
Ed, thank you so much. We need to wrap up here soon, but if in just a minute or two, are there any things that you want to make sure to not leave here without saying? That's a big question.
That's a big question. I'm trying to think about what I really do want to say.
Yeah.
The takeaway is, again, because for those people who know of me, and there's a difference between knowing me and knowing of me, mm-hmm. Who think that maybe, I'm arrogant or whatever. I hope that this podcast helps to more personalize who I am and give more of the side of how I really think and how I really interact with people. So the takeaway is, I get that it's hard.
You've been there.
But yeah, I've been there, and I'm still there sometimes. But putting in the effort to help create change, to help facilitate change, is always worth it.
I agree. I think there are no finer words to leave with. So thanks again for joining me today, Ed. Really appreciate it. If people would like to reach out to you, what's the best way? Do you want them to email me and I'll forward it, or is there a...
So you can set up an appointment with me on IOPIMedical.com.
There you go.
My calendar is laid out there. So if you want to have a meeting with me, if you want to email me, ed@IOPIMedical.com. I am always happy to dialogue with people. I am always happy to engage and try to promote this profession and help our patients and help our fellow clinicians.
All right. Well, I appreciate that very much. Thank you so much, Ed, and hope to see you soon at, I don't know, whatever conference it is next that I'm able to afford. So, see you around. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We hope this episode has been engaging and beneficial to you. If it has, please leave a review, share us with those in your community. We know that together we can do more than any one of us can individually to improve the level of competency with which we provide services for patients with swallowing disorders. So thank you so much for being a part of this, and we welcome engaging with you in the future and invite you to please tune in for future episodes. We have some exciting things coming up, and with your help, we truly look forward to making a difference.